Hello and welcome to Reader's Lounge Live. I am Scott from the Youth Services Department of Mid-Continent Public Library. And today we're going to talk about our favorite books and authors. We're going to answer some questions from our customers. We're going to talk about some favorite resources. You can find information to all of these in the links below in the description. And I'm joined by Andrew and Angie. And we're going to start out by letting them introduce themselves with what they're currently reading. So we'll start with you, Andrew.
Okay, thank you, Scott.
You're welcome.
I wanted to share actually what turned out to be my favorite book I read this year, which I read not too long ago, and it was called The Foghorn Echoes by Danny Ramadan. And it is about two boys who live in Syria and they're best friends as children, and then after something tragic happens, how their lives sort of go in such different ways. One of them ends up as a refugee in Canada, while the other one ends up staying in Syria, and just sort of the cycles of life and how life changes and how people come together and come apart, and just how life goes. Another one that I recently read, actually, and what I love reading during winter especially, is cozy mysteries. And one of my favorite recent cozy mysteries is called Vera Wong's, I'm going to have to look. Vera Wong's Unsolicited Advice for Murderers. And that one is by Jesse Q. Sutanto. And it's just, for me, a perfect cozy mystery. You have an elderly lady who runs a tea shop, and then suddenly there's a body in the tea shop, and she has to go about her own ways to end up solving the murder. And it has all the hallmarks you get of cozy mysteries, and I just really enjoyed that one. And one other book I recently read that something else I love to do is reading books in the same time period where they're happening. So for example, a book to read in winter I read was called We Are Okay, and that one is by Nina LaCour. And that one is definitely a book to read. It's a downer. It's a book, for example, if you are grieving or have known somebody who's grieving, it's about a character who is dealing with a lot of grief. And so it is kind of a sad read, but it is, midwinter. And I really enjoy finding, kind of being with the character in the same time of year where they are. And those are some of the books I've read recently.
Great. I'm going to go back 1 second for our viewers who might not know what cozy mysteries are. I know, Angie, you do a lot of talking about our genres, and you mentioned it. Mm-hmm. So if you want to start talking about it, and you can fill in to get some appeals terms. And
how I tend to define cozy mysteries are typically ones that follow a lot of what you might say, there's a better word for not stereotypes, but there's certain hallmarks that happen in a mystery. Usually the protagonist is somebody who's older or retired, and they're solving sort of, a small town crime or a murder that happens. They tend to not have anything gruesome or anything too explicit. I would compare them to TV shows I always think back to Monk or Diagnosis Murder, or even Murder, She Wrote, as sort of hallmarks of what I consider a cozy mystery.
Yeah, it would be the same. The violence usually happens off the stage, so they're a little bit more gentler. And usually they take place in a small town or a rural town, and people are using kind of their social connections and the fact that they're nosy and can ask people questions and get information that way to solve the murder, rather than a police department investigating.
So as a fan of the Agatha Raisin TV show, should I be checking out Cozy Mysteries?
Yes, in fact, those started out as a cozy mystery series.
I was worried that you were going to say that, and now I have something to read. Not worried, I was excited that you were going to say that.
Is Agatha Raisin a parody of Agatha Christie?
No, she's just a big city, PR person, and she needs a break, or retires, does she? She needs a break and goes to the countryside, and then murders are following her. I'll tell you more about the books next time.
Well, if you are a cozy mystery fan, I haven't personally read this, but I have it checked out right now. Station Eternity by Mira Lafferty is basically a cozy mystery set in space. So it's about someone who like a cozy mystery sleuth, just happens to stumble across a whole lot of dead bodies in her life, and she's tired of solving them. So she goes to a space station thinking she's going to get away from it, but the dead bodies follow her. So,
Sure. Angie,
yes.
do you want to tell us what you're reading?
Sure. Well, one of my favorite recent reads was What You Were Looking For Is in the Library by Michiko Aoyama. And that it is a Japanese novel, and it's about 5 different people who go to a community library, and they're all kind of lost and kind of lacking purpose in their life. And so they go in and they look for books on manga or starting a business, and the quirky librarian gives them a list of books on their topic, but also some completely random, unrelated book too. And it ends up being like the perfect book at the perfect time for each of them. So for some of them, it's like a book of poetry or a book of photography. What I liked about it is that it didn't lead to some like grand epiphany or anything. It just caused them to look at the world in a slightly different way. And so they could see connections in like a memory or in a conversation with someone, or just took them one step further towards maybe a dream that they were having. And I also like that each of them kind of unknowingly serve as catalysts for someone else to move a little bit forward too. So it's a really kind of lovely ode to kind of the magic of books and reading, and of, finding that book that kind of resonates with you at the right time. And when you're reading something, when you sometimes all of a sudden start to see connections to it everywhere and the other things you're reading or watching, or in conversations that you're having too. So it's the perfect book for librarians, I think. It's a little more heartwarming and like tidy than I usually go for, but it was very charming.
Yeah, I mean, last time you talked about Murderbot.
Yeah.
So you're like, just a little gentler for me. So I am going to talk about the book Destiny Finds Her Way by Margarita Engel, and it is about a sloth, a real sloth, and it is very cute. So it's in Costa Rica, and it starts out, it's a picture book, so the journey is pretty simple beats. But it starts out that some scientists hear some whimpering in the brush of the forest floor, and they find this baby sloth, and it's very sick, it's malnourished, and it has a sore eye. And so they take it back. They're like, this sloth isn't going to make it, but it starts to eat, be able to feed itself, and they're like, okay, so they have to train the sloth. So these scientists who have never been a sloth have to train the sloth to be able to live on its own in the wild. And they're able to do that, and they have sent Destiny back out. There's a tracker on Destiny, so they can kind of keep track of it. But it's just like a super adorable book with these great pictures of all the animals in Costa Rica, of Destiny herself, and kind of the journey along the way. So that's Destiny Finds Her Way by Margarita Engel. We had Andrew talk about quite a few. Do you have another title you want to talk about?
Sure. We were talking earlier about sometimes you just need a lighter read, and romance is that for me sometimes. And so I recently read Roleplaying by Kathy Yardley. And this is a romance novel with Maggie and Aiden, and they both meet online through a video game guild. And they're both about 50 years old, and through some kind of series of misunderstandings, Maggie thinks Aiden is in his 20s, as a lot of gamer guys are, and he thinks she's in her 80s. And so it's not, but they develop a really close friendship online through their online chats and on the raids they go on, and then they start texting, and it's not until they meet in person that they realize that they are about the same age, and they may have feelings for each other that go beyond friendship. I know a lot of people like romance for like the fantasy and fairy tale aspect, but I tend to like ones that are a little bit more grounded, that have characters that are a little bit more flawed and like going through things. And it was also nice to see some older protagonists in romance. I also like anytime the characters come together through a common interest or passion. In romance. In this case, it was video games. So I'm all for more nerdy romances and for more romances with older protagonists. And it also had other really great representation in it too.
Cool. I think another title I wanted to talk about, which is also a semi-romance. I was on our catalog, Bibliocommons, and there were some customer ratings of some manga, and they all looked really interesting to me. And so I checked this one out called Star-Crossed. And it is about a teenage girl who is obsessed with a J-pop band. That's Japanese pop. Idol groups is what they're often called. K-pop is kind of the bigger version of that. But she is obsessed with this J-pop idol, and she is at their show in the front row, like the first time she's ever been in the front row. She can see him, and a stage light falls, and she sees it falling and is going to save his life. So jumps onto stage, but fails in saving him, and they both die. But when they get to the afterlife, they're told, "Oh, it's not your time yet. Go back." But when they are sent back, their bodies are switched. However, their bodies keep switching back and forth, and they can't figure out why. So there's a little bit of like, what's going on? But they are getting closer and closer. So there's like a little bit of relationship being built. Slash the J-pop guy is really like trying to take care of her, especially when he is in her body. And it's just really interesting and strange and funny, and kind of gives you that fan side of things where they're like so obsessed that she can actually live his life and like go do interviews and do the concerts because she knows them so well. So that's Star-Crossed, and it's by Junko.
Now, did you say that was a manga, or is that a traditional book?
It is a manga. So that is a graphic novel, Japanese graphic novel. They read the opposite of what we read, so right to left, right? Like, how do you read? Right to left. So you flip it over when you get it, and start reading on the back. The cover's that way, so you'll get it. All right. Do we have any more books we would like to talk about today?
I have one more. Again, I've been reading a lot of really thick, long, kind of serious books, and so I needed a fun break, and so I picked up Starter Villain by John Scalzi. And I've been following John Scalzi online for a really long time, but this is his first novel that I've read. And this is about a guy, Charlie, who's down on his luck when he inherits his uncle's fortune, which is also comes with his supervillainry business. And so Charlie kind of has to take over the reins and gets involved in all sorts of shenanigans, like going to his first supervillain conference where everyone is determined to take advantage of his newness to the business to take over, the supervillain market share. He also has his own secret underground volcanic lair, and there's also, he's in the middle of a labor dispute with some very foul-mouthed dolphins, and the dolphins were my favorite part of this book. So as you can see, it was very light and fun, and not a book that you really take all that seriously, but it was a really enjoyable time.
Cool. Well, that is it for our favorite books. We'll go to our next section, which is Ask the Librarian.
And now it's time for the Ask the Librarians, where we take questions from staff and the public and we answer them right here on our show. So the first question that we have today is, what are some of your favorite authors and why? Scott, how about you?
I can go first. So the first person I want to talk about is Brian K. Vaughan, who is a comic book writer. I mentioned Runaways as being like one of my favorite things when I talked about Marco Shiro's Into the Light on our previous Readers Lounge Live, so check that out. But he has a series, a very long series right now called Saga. It is definitely a saga. It is about two warring nations, and the father and mother of the main character, Hazel, are from, each one is from one of the different planets. And so they are trying to run away from people who are trying to kill them, to break them up, to have them not have their child. And it's just super amazing. They're wild characters. The storyline is so compelling. The characters are well drawn. The aliens are always interesting. So it's super cool. Obviously, Runaways, I'm in love with, which is about a group of teens whose parents are supervillains, and they have to find their own powers, which they actually have because their parents are supervillains, to fight their parents, essentially. And then he wrote Why the Last Man, which is about a kid who is the last man on an Earth dominated by women. So they are very interested in him because how are they going to repopulate? Is kind of their question within that. So that's one. He writes kind of teen and then older, although I think he has done some like one-offs of superhero or arcs of superhero stories that are maybe, I don't know the answer to this because I haven't read them, maybe more appropriate for kids. But Runaways is for teens, the rest definitely adult. Carol Boston Weatherford is another author that I love. She writes mainly nonfiction and pretty much only about Black figures throughout the world. I have an autographed copy of The History of Rap that she wrote that is one of my favorites. But she covers just all sorts of interesting characters. Like one is about the first Black librarian. There's one about Gordon Parks, who is a photographer. Jesse Owens, I was like, what is the name of the runner that she covered? Her award-winning book from last year, year before, is about the Tulsa Race Massacres, which I love graphic novels. They come up in the Watchmen television show on HBO. And then the last person for favorite authors I'm going to talk about is Elizabeth Acevedo, who is a poet, I think was a youth poet laureate. But her first book, The Poet X, is a book in verse, if you were unaware of what that is, a book written in poems, essentially. But I really recommend her audiobooks. She reads all of her audiobooks, and she is amazing. Her voice goes really well. She knows how to tell her stories. And that's not always the case with authors reading their books. But she has some just really fascinating, really amazing stories, and just released an adult book that I haven't read and wasn't even aware of until Angie told me about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I second Scott's recommendation, especially on audio of that author. And the adult book is Family Lore, and I was enjoying it very much until Libby decided to take it away from me because I had it too long. So I look forward to getting that back soon.
Cool. Did you have some other favorite authors that you wanted to share, Angie?
Sure. I will sneak in a few of them. I obviously have some favorite classics like Jane Austen, Edith Wharton, Willa Cather, and some favorite well-known contemporary writers like Colson Whitehead and Louise Erdrich, which is my way to sneak in even more authors. But the ones I want to talk about are a few that maybe aren't quite on everyone's radar and should be. The first is Anthony Marra. He's written 3 books. And he writes really stunning sentences, just on the sentence level. He's one of my favorite writers today. They're very beautiful and fresh and funny, very frequently very witty. And that would be enough to make him one of my favorite writers, but he also uses those sentences to write very moving stories about human connection. His debut novel, A Constellation of Vital Phenomena, is set in the 90s during the wars in Chechnya, but it's really about 3 different figures and how their lives intersect and really could have taken place anywhere. And the second one I want to talk about is, she's only written 1 book, but I really loved it. It's Fatima Farheen Mirza, and the book was A Place for Us, her debut novel, and I'm anxiously awaiting her to write more. But that book was about a Muslim family at the daughter's wedding, and it's clear that the son has been estranged for some time from the family. And so we go in the present at the wedding, but also in the past to see what happened to this family. It starts out a little bit slow because there's all these moments that you think are kind of minor, but then you see them through another character's perspectives later and you realize they have a lot more weight and heft to them. And the last section of that book is told from one character's perspective and is one of the most riveting and moving and powerful things I've ever read. And then the last author I want to talk about is Kevin Wilson. And nobody really combines like humor and heart and what it means to be a very flawed and messy human, quite like Kevin Wilson. He will frequently have something a little slightly absurd or surreal in his books, like people catch on fire. Spontaneous combustion happens a lot in his books, like a lot. But he kind of uses these kind of strange moments to showcase kind of how humans might respond, real people might respond. And so his books have, again, a lot of humor and a lot of heart to them. And he's one of my favorites.
It's funny that you mentioned spontaneous combustion. I just watched a movie from, I think 2020, 2022, I think 2020, called Spontaneous, which is about teenagers spontaneously combusting, but not in like flames, like just they completely burst. And I told my friend it was kind of like The Fault in Our Stars, but instead of cancer, kids explode.
Well, his book "Nothing to See Here" is about a woman who takes care of these two children. When they get agitated, they catch on fire, and it's kind of like a metaphor for lots of big emotions that kids might have in various circumstances. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you for sharing. I always have difficulty with this question because I don't tend to read books because of the authors. I always end up saying Charles Dickens because I love A Christmas Carol and David Copperfield. But then I was also thinking I may not have a favorite author per se, but I actually have a favorite narrator. And I've listened to many books exclusively because she narrates them. Her name is Bonnie Turpin. I first listened to her when she read the Dread Nation series, which I highly recommend. And then I read a romance with her as the narrator called Sky Falling. I read a horror book where she's the narrator called The Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires. But I have gone out of my way multiple times just to read a book because she's the narrator. So maybe it's not a favorite author, but it's a favorite narrator. And so moving on to our second question, though, is somebody asked how they can request that the library add a book to the collection that we don't have. Angie?
Sure. Yeah, there is a form on our website that you can fill out. If you go to the library information tab, there is the using the library section, and under there is suggest a title. You can request up to 3 titles per month that the library add to our collection, and then you will be notified to let you know of the decision by our collection development department. You can also find that at the very bottom of the webpage in our help and facts section too.
Yes, I was going to point out the footer too, because there are many things, if you're not used to a website, is a lot of times I will go straight to the footer to see if it's there.
Yeah.
And suggested title is in our footer. But for people who are requesting digital items, our Libby app, Libby by Overdrive, has its own way for you to request titles. So if you do a search and what you're looking for isn't there, there's an option in the filters called Deep Search. And if you click that, it'll bring up all of the items that Libby has that we own or don't own. And then that way you can just mark notify me on each title that you want the library to own, and it notifies our staff, and they will determine whether or not they can add it to the collection.
What's the turnaround time on something like that?
I mean, it varies from title to title, and it varies kind of based on budget seasons. I know at least for the physical form, they go through those at least on a monthly basis. And the nice thing about the form is that when you fill it out, you get an email letting you know that your submission has gone through. But then when the librarians have made a decision, you also get an email either telling you it's in the system and you can place it on hold, or we aren't able to get it and it can't be added to the system. But no matter what, you're notified in that scenario.
And one thing that customers might not be aware of too, especially if you're trying to add digital materials, is that not everything may not be available for the library to purchase digitally. This happens a lot with audiobooks. That might be like an Audible exclusive, for example. And so we would love to get that item for you too, but sometimes we're just not able to.
Yes.
I think I just saw Starter Villain as a Audible exclusive audiobook, so I'm like, well, looks like I'm going to be reading some John Scalzi.
And that happens sometimes. But our librarians do the best they can to collect as much as we can for our customers. Now, the final question we have today, we got a request from somebody asking, it's actually a reading suggestion, for children's books that use photographs in them rather than illustrations, because the person asking the question is a photographer and they wanted to show their kids how photos can be used in multiple ways. Do either of you have some ideas on to help this customer?
I do, and I was so excited by this question because I was like, that's really interesting, and I could think of a couple off the top of my head, but it was really fun to dig into it and find more. And realized that I don't have to be the expert in everything. Angie has a couple titles, but I reached out to a branch staff member that I knew loved to use books with photographs in their story time, and that's Jamie from our Woodneath branch. So I'm going to do her recommendations and then throw it to yours, and then I have a few more of my own. So she recommends John Churchman and his wife Jennifer. They write a cute farm series with photo collages. So there's The Sheep Over, Brave Little Finn, Alpaca Lunch. Those are 3 of them. But we're in the winter season, so there's one called The Christmas Barn that also has photographs. She recommended Jane Brockett, who has one called Rainy, Sunny, Blowy, Snowy. So if you want to use a picture book to talk about the seasons, as we are currently changing seasons or as we're moving into a moment where it might actually snow, hopefully this year. Shelley Rotner, who her most recent book is Everybody, A Celebration of Diverse Abilities, but she has some really nice books about like different kinds of families, but also about food, just in general, like food shapes and things like that. And then the other one that I had, but Jamie also recommended, is Terry Border, and he has this great book, and this is his general style, but he has this great book called Scaredy Snacks, where it's actual food, but he has turned them into characters. So like a Puff Cheeto has paper clips for legs, and they are scared of something, and so the story is told through kind of anthropomorphic foods because they are given a personality, but it's pictures of the foods with silly legs and arms. Angie, you had a few that you wanted to talk about.
Yeah, I think juvenile nonfiction has a lot of really great choices for books with photographs. And some of the fun ones that I always noticed in the brains were the ones that kind of played with size and perspective with the photographs. And so there's a book called Small Matters that looks at like very microscopic things, Curious Comparisons that does size comparisons. There's the Life Size series, like Life Size Zoo, Life Size Farms, where you get to see just a portion of an animal in through pictures. So again, to kind of play with size and perspective. And then another one that kids would particularly enjoy is the Butt or Face series, where they show a picture and you have to determine which end of the animal it might be.
I got so excited when I saw that book yesterday because it's like a butt that obviously has googly eyes on it to make it look like a face, and I was like, I gotta check this out. So it's on its way to me right now. Real excited about butt or face. Some other things I wanted to mention. April Pulley Sayer, who is one of my favorite authors. I was going to say all, that is not true. Most of her books are nonfiction that have very nice photographs and rhyming texts that go along with them. My favorite being one called Being Frog, which is just about a day in the life of a frog, but it just has this beautiful like green color hue throughout, and just really great, stunning photos. And I love that she writes nonfiction in rhyming text for smaller kids. I also wanted to plug, like just very briefly, it's not a photographic book, her book Did You Burp, which is, if you've ever worked with kids, they love to ask inappropriate questions. So it is talking about the time to ask those questions. Like, it's okay to ask, did you burp, like if you're a doctor, but it's not okay, like if the mayor is visiting your classroom, to be like, did you burp? So that one's really great. Anything with baby faces, so Global Babies is a really great one. My manager, Katie, mentioned the Let's Find Momo books by Andrew Knapp, and that started on Instagram. They're adult versions, which she mentioned are sometimes too hard, so she likes the kids' versions, and those are called Let's Find Momo and then Let's Find Momo in a Certain Place. I didn't write the title down. And I didn't know how old the kids were, so the DK Touch and Feel books, there's like Sheep and Panda. Those are board books. If you have a baby or a young toddler, those are great ways to learn about different textures and to learn about how books work. And the final one I wanted to mention was this book called Dreaming Up by Christy Hale, which is another one of my favorites just generally. It is about different architectural forms and architectural buildings. So it talks about people like I.M. Pei, who created the glass triangle that's at the Louvre, and other things, but also Frank Lloyd Wright. And there's concrete poems. Concrete poems are poems that look like what they're talking about, and illustrations, but then she uses the photographs to kind of tie those together and show, hey, here's what the poem looked like, here's what the actual building looks like, and here was what my illustration looked like. So very cool book, Dreaming Up by Christy Hale.
Okay. And I, as somebody not very well versed in children's literature, I'm impressed just by the sheer range of titles that you all have found. When I was thinking about it, as somebody who grew up just looking at the Where's Waldo books, I thought of the I Spy books because they're look and find with pictures. Not quite as much of a range as what you all are looking for, but I am very impressed with just how great our librarians are at researching these topics for customers. So if you have any questions that you'd like to share with us to get answered on our show, you can do that in two ways. You can email us at booktalk@mymcpl.org, or you can go join the Reader's Lounge on the Facebook group, and you can contact us both of those ways. So thank you, and let us know if you have any questions.
All right, and so our final segment of this edition is our Librarian Choice segment, where each of us are going to share something that's happening either in the library or out in the world that we are excited to share. So Scott, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I'm going to talk about a resource that we have. So I do a lot of work with Reader's Advisory and building up the resources that we have and talking about them. So I wanted to talk about Bookflix and Tumble Books. So they both do similar things, but in slightly different ways. And that is, they have videos that kind of read books to your kids. There's kind of these famous book videos, Book2 video production company called Weston Woods. So there's a lot of Weston Woods on there, and they've won multiple awards for their productions. But Bookflix pairs a fiction and a nonfiction book. The fiction book has a video that has the words that read along with you, semi-animated illustrations based on the book, and then the nonfiction is kind of a read with. So it will read it to you and highlight the words, but it's kind of building on the theme for it and helping you kind of learn to read. So it's a really great option. Tumble Books has kind of a wider catalog of different kinds of things. So they do have the books that read to you and have videos that you can kind of give to your kids. So you have this option of, I have to cook dinner, but I want to give my kid something literary. And so you could play those videos for your kid. But they also have books like early chapter books. They have graphic novels. So it's a little Libby-y, but a lot of them have read-along options. So for your early readers, your kids who are learning to read, I will read along with them to help them build their vocabulary and skills. And so those are both super great.
Well, where would our customers go to access these?
Yeah, you can find them on, so we have a books and reading page on the kids section. So on our website, up top, there's a section that says kids. If you're on the mobile app, find the hamburger menu, the 3 lines, to find the kids section. Then there's books and reading, and you can find it at the top of that, or go to the resources, which is on the middle section on our homepage. And you can go there, or you can just type it into the search bar, do Bookflix, which is what I do most of the time anyway. It's like, oh, I know what I'm looking for. And you can find Bookflix or Tumble Books. There's also an app for Tumble Books. Last time I checked, I don't know that Bookflix had one, or that might be the one that goes back and forth between having an app and not having an app, because I think they are working on making the technology work, because it might still be in Flash versus HTML5. and that's how they show their video formats. Yeah. Andrew?
I
Okay.
hear that you are going to be teasing a popular program that the library
I
offers.
am. Something that people look forward to every winter is our winter reading challenge. So I'm going to give you at least a first teaser about it. This year's winter reading challenge theme is going to be literary love. So it's going to be all about love. And I am a big fan not only of the romance genre, but of all sorts of love stories, which now would be a good time to explain the difference between romance versus other love stories. Romance, as you may or may not know, tend to be the happily ever after romances. You go in expecting and getting your happily ever after. I know during the winter season, I watch pretty much every new Christmas romance that gets posted online. And I just sit there and revel in the watching the couple struggle and then knowing that they're going to come out on the top in the end. And so that's something that I personally love about those romance titles. But this year's theme goes beyond just romance to literary love. So it will include any romance or love story in other genres too. Some that I think of are the ones that end either less than happily or maybe more bittersweet. Examples might be The Notebook or Atonement, both which are great novels that were also turned into very popular movies. And actually, The Notebook is now a musical as well. But this year's theme is going to encompass all of those. And so whether you're looking for your Elizabeth and Darcy and your Pride and Prejudice, I will finally finish it this year.
I will hold you to that.
I'm about halfway through. It's hard. It's it's a classic that is very difficult for me to finish, but I will do it. So regardless of which type of romance or love story you are a fan of, we're going to have resources for you. And I'm excited. I have my whole row of Winter Reading Challenge mugs that I've won over the years, and I'm looking forward to adding this year's mug as well.
All right. And when will that start, Andrew?
Yes, it starts January 15th, and it runs January 15th through March 15th. Registration this year will begin on January 15th, so it coincides with when the actual challenge starts. And if you want to learn more, the information will be coming and it will be on our website at mymcpl.org/winterreading. Right now, if you go there, you're just going to get teaser information. It's not all out yet. But by the time January 15th rolls around, you'll have all the information you need right there on that webpage.
Okay. And if you want to earn one of your mugs like Andrew's collection, you'll just need to read 5 books during that time period, whether they're on the theme or not. Well, I'm also excited to share a project that we started last year that will be coming out at the beginning of December. Last year, for the first time, our Reader Services and Youth Services staff compiled a Best Books of 2022. So we surveyed our staff to share some of our favorite reads, and we're going to be doing that again this year. So you're going to hear all about our staff's favorite picture books, juvenile fiction books, young adult books, adult fiction, and nonfiction. And hey, we might throw in some movies, some audiobooks, some graphic novels too. So do we want to maybe tease something that was on your favorite, one of your favorite reads or movies?
I shared one of my favorite books, but it was my favorite book, so I will share it again. And it's The Foghorn Echoes by Danny Ramadan, which could fall under the winter reading category, maybe kinda-ish. It may be sort of a sideways into the challenge, but it's a difficult read, but I loved it because I do love difficult reads, except Pride and Prejudice. One of my other favorites that I might try and get included on the page is my favorite book adaptations into movies this year, one of which I was going to share was The Haunting in Venice, which if you have not seen, I thoroughly enjoyed. If you love Agatha Christie, I highly recommend the movie over the book, which is an odd thing that happens occasionally. So those are my contributions.
Okay. Scott, did you have anything to share?
Yeah, so I have done a lot of reading of children's books. Destiny Finds Her Way is pretty much by far one of my favorite reads of the year, which I already talked about and was real excited to talk about. But I was like, let's talk about some movies. Because I do a lot of movie watching. I'm what some people might call a reluctant reader, kind of struggling with finding the right book currently. Which is why these are always great, and I have some trainings that I do with Angie and get some titles. And I just checked out Don't Fear the Reaper by Stephen Graham Jones, which is about a slasher-obsessed teenager, and that was released this year, so could be my favorite book of the year. Might be the only like non-picture book that I've read this year. But I wanted to talk about some movies. Big one, like for me, Barbie. Is probably my favorite of 2023. Just so fun and so clever. And then the Dungeons and Dragons Honor Among Thieves kind of has that exact same thing, but a very different kind of movie about a group of adventurers who are kind of going through the world, but there's everything that Dungeons and Dragons fans love. So I got to listen to like Dungeons and Dragons fans talk about it, but I am not one of those people. So it was like fun to hear like, oh, we got to see the owlbear and how they shapeshifted and the cube that eats them throughout. But that movie was so much fun. Like as soon as I came out, I was like, I got to watch this again.
I mean, I was actually really surprised how much I enjoyed that movie. I was going to see it because other people wanted to see it. It's fine. I'll go see most anything. But I loved that movie. It was so much fun.
And my final one, I love horror, and Scream 6 came out this year, Scream in New York, which I loved. It's a very consistent, Scream is my favorite horror movie, my favorite movie in general. And the series has kept itself fairly consistent. Scream 6 is not like the first one I would recommend, but it was a great watch. You could just go watch Scream 1. 6 times. That would be a way to go along with things. But that one doesn't take place in New York, and having that different setting was really interesting and a fun way to see things. Plus, has Jenna Ortega, who's huge in everything these days.
You know, and this year is the first time I actually watched all of the Scream movies. So I got to introduce myself to them all like right together, and seeing that evolution in a short time span. So you are right. It is very consistent. But no, I really enjoyed the 6th one, partly because I do love New York,
Right.
And Jenna Ortega. And I think a lot of the other cast is really strong as well. So I'm looking forward to the next one.
Sure.
Okay. Well, I am still whittling down my list, but I think one of them that will appear book-wise is Shangang All-Stars by Nana Kwame Adjei-Brenyah. And this is a book that imagines a future dystopia where the prison system is privatized and prisoners have a choice to participate in the Hard Sports League, which basically involves gladiatorial fight to the death battles. And if they make it out for 3 years, then they win their freedom. And so this book follows 2 legendary female fighters who are both on the verge of earning their freedom. But we also get perspectives from a protest group that is protesting the existence of the league. You get the executives who run it. You get some of their competitors. And most interestingly, a couple of fans' perspectives too. And so you get to watch kind of the evolution of someone just getting introduced to this to becoming full-on obsessed. I loved his debut story collection, Friday Black. And both of those are just very bold and brutal and imaginative and thought-provoking. So that will probably be on my list. But one of the wonderful things about the library is that we don't always have to read the brand new and shiny. We have plenty of backlists in our collection too. So one of my actual favorite reading experiences of this year was a book I reread for the first time in about 15 years, a book called The Brothers K by David James Duncan. It's a book about baseball and politics and Vietnam and religion, but most of all it's about a family and the things that we do to love and care for each other. Just got beautiful writing, very playful and poignant, and I just absolutely loved getting to read that book again. All right. Well, those are just a few things that you might have to look forward to coming from MCPL, or some things that are always available, like the resources that Scott shared. And again, you can learn more about all of those things. If you have any other questions or suggestions or comments about our show, we will be back again in next quarter. And you can email us at booktalk@mymcpl.org and let us know what you think.